The interesting thing is that, yes, muscle cells are cells, but they're a little special and they have some special names for their structures. So in a general cell, we have a cell membrane. And in a muscle cell, the cell membrane is sometimes called a special name we call the sarcolemma. I know, it's just something you just have to deal with. So this is where sarco is often referring to, so this is where we're using the sarco prefix to mean muscle. And then the cytoplasm, well, the cytoplasm is also given a special name in muscle cells. It's called sarcoplasm. If you're a gym bro, you probably heard of this term. So sarcoplasm is just the cytoplasm of a muscle cell. And then the endoplasmic reticulum in a cell is also called the sarcoplasmic reticulum in a muscle cell. And it's not only that, it not only does the functions of a regular endoplasmic reticulum. One thing that's really important in all muscle cell types is that the sarcoplasmic reticulum, well, it also stores in regular cells, but one big function of it is to store calcium. So there's a lot of calcium ions in the muscle cell at rest that's stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Then the mitochondrion, I've seen this sometimes, but it's not too often I see this term. If you hear something called a sarcosome, it's just saying the mitochondria of a muscle cell. So notice that muscle cells, sometimes like these cytologists, they have to make things more difficult and give it special names for these muscle cells. So they're giving it all these, like, they don't just call it just regular things. Sometimes they use these names over here. So what do you call the nucleus of a muscle cell? So they don't call it the sarconucleus. Thankfully, it's just like they keep that part the same. So nuclei are still nuclei in a muscle cell. But almost like you notice that all these other parts of the cell, they're giving it special names. They think muscles are special, but all cells are kind of special. Okay, so let's talk about cell differentiation. So remember that cells can develop into other types of cells, and some cells, they start off as one type of cells and then mature and become another type of cell. So remember how osteoblasts, they can develop into osteocytes once they're fully enveloped in bone matrix, and they're no longer just secreting new osteoid and matrix. Now they're repairing them and maintaining the matrix surrounding them. Now chondrocytes, what do you think we should call a precursor or immature chondro? Or remember, chondro means cartilage, right? So what's an immature chondrocyte? This is what we call a chondroblast. These are the ones that make new cartilage. Lymphocytes, we didn't cover that yet. We're going to actually cover them more in detail next semester. But hey, with this trend, what should we call an immature lymphocyte? Let's call it a lymphoblast. Fibrocyte, remember that they're important in maintaining the fibers of our matrix in our connective tissue. What should we call immature fibrocyte? I give it away, fibroblast. So given that, what should we call the precursor immature form of a myocyte? Okay, so the major responses, we see myoblast, myoplasma, but yeah, the most popular is myoblast, and you're correct. So myoblasts are the precursor, they're the immature form of a muscle cell. Yeah, myoblasts. So again, this is why knowing blast and site is very useful, because it kind of tells you what develops into what. So you kind of know not to put the site before the blast. Here's the rock. When was this? But does the rock look like this now? No, he's got bigger, right? So the rock went from this, and now he's looking more like this. So how do you go from this rock before and rock after? Well, let's not talk about but let's talk about other things. Like say you're training, and how do you bulk up? How do you add more muscle tissue? So how do you do that on the cellular level? This is where we have to talk about myoblasts and something called myosatellite cells. I don't think when I last read the OpenStax book, they didn't really cover about satellite cells too much in depth. Maybe they updated it. But what we have are these myosatellite cells. And this is what we're seeing in this pale, kind of off-white colored cell here. And myosatellite cells are kind of like the stem cells of your muscle tissue. So these myosatellite cells are kind of hanging out here on the periphery next to these muscle fibers. And what they can do is develop into these myoblasts. So myoblasts, they can fuse to form these muscle fibers. And these muscle fibers, so this is why they're a skeletal muscle fiber is multinucleated, and it has multiple nucleuses or nuclei. So each of them, they start out as an individual myoblast, but they fuse their membrane together, so now they're one big cell, but their previous individual nuclei, now they're all part of the same cell. So this is why as you go from a myoblast to a muscle fiber or a myocyte, is that why you have all these nuclei. So these all used to be individual myoblasts before. Now these myosatellite cells, they're still there, and the thing is that, okay, yeah, so the myocytes are new multinucleated, and the thing is that these myoblasts also can repair muscle by fusing with existing muscle fibers. So the thing is that once you have a mature muscle fiber, this entire structure can't undergo mitosis and divide like a regular individual cell. So this is why you need these myosatellite cells and these myoblasts to divide and replicate and undergo mitosis, so you can regenerate more muscle cells and fuse them with these muscle fibers or make new muscle fibers. So these myosatellite cells, sometimes just called satellite cells, and actually there's multiple use of the term satellite cells in different tissues, but I'm going to specify it more by saying myosatellite cells to say that we're talking about the satellite cells specifically in the muscle tissue. And these myosatellite cells, they can fuse to help repair and create more myoblasts that can fuse to make a new muscle fiber. Okay, so how do these myosatellite cells function? Well, this is actually something that they're still studying to this day, and like I don't think it's like completely scientific canon, but I think most evidence is pointing to this microtear theory of hypertrophy of these muscle fibers. But say you're doing a really hard workout, well, what's that going to do to your cells? When you're doing you're in the gym and and hopefully not locking your knees during a leg press, but say you're really working out your skeletal muscles, and by doing all this tension and stress and force on these skeletal muscles, it also induces these small, what we call micro tears. And these micro tears are going to damage the structure of this muscle fiber. Now, is your muscle fiber just going to stay damaged? No, it's not going. Hopefully not, because again, your muscle fibers, they need to function, and if they continue to be damaged, then they're going to degrade and also affect your strength as well. So hopefully you have enough time for your body to repair itself. So these myosatellite cells, they can divide, undergo mitosis, and then become fused and repair with the micro tears. So what happens is that when they fuse and help to repair these small little tears in the muscle fibers, well, they add their volume to that muscle fiber. So if you continue the cycle and you're able to rest enough, and this is why if you're into like really building up your muscles, this is why they say it's not just about putting in the hard work in the gym, but also getting adequate rest. So every time you rest, what happens is that your body is repairing itself from the previous day's activities. Same with your skeletal muscles. So as you induce all these tears, hopefully you have enough myosatellite cell activity so that they can migrate to these small little tears and damage muscle fibers, fuse with them, repair, and as they repair and add their volume to the fiber, these fibers are going to grow bigger because of the increased volume. And now I always hear this especially when the few times I go to like a bodybuilding forum and see like people arguing about sarcoplasmic versus myofibril hypertrophy. I don't have an opinion on it either way, and plus like if you're adding more protein to a cell, you're going to bulk up the cell anyway. So it's like, okay, why are you trying to make this like separate, this sort of like separation between the two? So whether one occurs versus the other, don't worry about that for this class, but know that myosatellite cells is pretty well established that they migrate and they increase their activity in response to trauma and damage to a muscle fiber. Exactly how, they're still trying to pinpoint the exact mechanisms.